I want to call your attention to something that was popular before the turn of the century. And by the turn of the century, I mean the 1990s. Does that make you feel old like it does me? Talking about these things. Remember those? I guess maybe they might have gone by various names. I knew them as magic eye posters or pictures. On the surface, they look like smudged paint or just squiggly lines. But if you focus your eyes just right, a three-dimensional image appears. This one, incidentally, if you can't get it, it's a kangaroo wearing boxing gloves, for whatever that's worth. When those first came out, it took me forever to be able to get it right, to get my eyes to focus exactly right where this 3D image would appear. But the more I did it, the better I got at it. And you could say that it was literally all in how you looked at it. Life can be somewhat that way too. All right, stop, okay? Listen now. I can see all these people doing this. Life can be that way. On the surface, sometimes life can be very confusing. Life can look like just a bunch of squiggly lines and smudged paint. You can't make anything out of it. But if we train our eyes to look at life the right way, then the real picture can become clearer. I've preached 3 lessons this year so far from today's text, 2 Corinthians 4, verses 16 through 18. And these are lessons that aimed primarily at our senior saints. We call them our amazing grays. But something in it for all of us, I think. And so we've done these lessons under this broad heading of as you get older. So far, the lessons have been, again, from this text, the first lesson was, do not lose heart. Sometimes we have a tendency to do that as we age, and so in some encouragement in that direction. The second lesson, you are more than a body. Our bodies do tend to wear out, but there's more to us than that. And then the third lesson we called A New Life is Coming. And today I want to finish our look at this text by really trying to draw all of that together under Paul's last word of encouragement in this text, specifically from verse 18, where Paul encourages his readers, that would include us, look at what you can't see. Look at what you can't see. Now, in context, when we think about the book of 2 Corinthians, Paul faced a lot of things that could have led him to throw in the towel if he was of weaker character. In Corinth, charges were evidently being leveled against him. I've used this analogy before. I think it works. When you're listening to someone talk on the phone, you're hearing one side of the conversation. You can't hear what's on the other side, unless they have it on speaker, but, work with me here. Think of old phone where you didn't have that. You hear one side of the conversation. But even though you're only hearing one side of the conversation, a lot of times you can kind of figure out what's going on the other end based upon what you are hearing. When we read these letters written to these congregations, we're hearing one side of the conversation. But based upon what we're hearing or reading, we can kind of pick up on what was probably taking place on the other end. When you read how Paul encountered and dealt with and wrote to the church at Corinth, you find that he was probably facing some charges, that he wasn't a real apostle, for one. That he was only doing what he was doing for the money. that he was deceitful or a coward, that he was a poor preacher. Yet, even though all of that was happening, Paul stayed the course. He didn't let those things get him down. And ultimately, the reason for that had to do with how he looked at those things, how he viewed them. He kept an eternal perspective. He looked at the things that are not seen. And that's what he encourages us to do. So specifically, as we grow older, and each day draws us closer to the end of our lives, we need to keep that eternal perspective ourselves. And so I want us to think about that for just a few minutes this morning. How do we do that? How do we keep an eternal perspective? Listen to what Paul talks about. In the first place, he'll tell us, admit your dual nature. Admit, you want to create an eternal perspective, admit your dual nature. Look again at chapter 4, verse 16. So, he says, we do not lose heart, though our outer self is wasting away. Our inner self is being renewed day by day. So, Paul refers to this dual nature of ours, the outer man, the inner man. And so we need to keep that in mind, also being aware that only one of those components has to experience decline. Now, they both can, but only one has to. Notice how Paul says this outer self is wasting away. And the older we get, the more we realize how true that is. And there's nothing we can do to stop that. We can do things that can, in a general sense and in a real sense, make us healthier people. But still, the outer self is wasting away, and it's going to continue to do that. Getting angry about that is not going to stop it. Throwing pity parties over that, it's not going to stop it. Those things really will only increase our bitterness. But Paul reminds us that there is a part of our nature that doesn't have to follow the path of our bodies. He calls it the inner man or the inner self, and speaks about or writes about how it can be renewed day by day. And so, as we think about creating this eternal perspective, that's really step one. It's admitting and recognizing that we have this dual nature. We're not just body, we're not just spirit. We are body and spirit. We are outer self and inner self. Add to that this second point. If we want to keep an eternal perspective or create one, we have to focus our attention on the unseen. And that's really the main point of our lesson today. And it does come from verse 18. Notice Paul writes, we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, temporal. But the things that are unseen are eternal. So there are things that Paul describes as being unseen things. And they're just as real as the seen things. And he wants our focus to be more on those things that we do not see. Now, here's where this kind of comes back into what we started with all those squiggly lines. We have to look deeper into life, deeper into life's circumstances than just what appears to be on the surface. If we only look at things as they are on the surface, we're going to miss some very important realities. But sometimes the nature of these surface matters are such that it makes it harder for us to see deeper. I used to fish a lot when I was younger and lived out in the country. You know, I once lived in Odessa, Texas, way out in West Texas. And when I moved out there, they said, hey, you know, Odessa, Texas is right in the middle of several really good fishing lakes. It's like 200 miles every direction, but we're like right in the middle of that. But I used to fish when I was younger, and one of the things that we talked about at the 9 o'clock hour, things that blow you away. What blew me away the first time I ever put a pair of them on were polarized sunglasses. You look at the surface of the water, and all you see is glare. You put on polarized sunglasses, the glare goes away. You can actually see under the water. You can see in the water if the water itself is clear. And so you can see things on the surface, but you can't see underneath. But if you can see underneath, if you can see deeper, things become clearer. Again, life is that way. We can look at things and only get a surface perspective of them, but if that's all we're getting, we're missing out on so much. We're getting a distorted view of what actually is. I'll give you a couple of passages to think about. Jesus talked about judgments that we make, and he said, you know, don't judge things merely by appearances, but judge with righteous judgment. And that had to do primarily with his identity and how people were mischaracterizing the things that he did and his character because of what he was doing. But the point is still the same. We can make judgments about things just based on surface matters and miss out on reality. So we need to have a more righteous approach to those things. Look at the total picture and be able to see deeper than just what's on the surface. Remember 1 Samuel 16? When David was being the one selected to be the king, to succeed Saul, and Samuel was supposed to go to the sons of Jesse and pick the right one, and God said, remember, the Lord does not see as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, God looks on the heart. There's a difference between what appears to be the case, there's a difference between what appears on the surface versus what you can see deeper inside. All right, so we get the principle. What about some applications in focusing on the unseen? You know, on the surface it may appear that all forms of suffering are bad. You know, that's kind of the surface assessment of suffering, is that there's nothing good about it. It's all bad. It's all horrible. I don't in any way intend to take away from the severity of suffering that people go through, whether it's physical or emotional, mental, spiritual. But if you can look deeper than what's on the surface, you'll find that, you know, there can be benefits to suffering. James says the testing of our faith produces patience. James 1 verse 2. And so what may be something that really tests the level, the depth of our faith and can be a horrible experience to go through can actually bring about something good. But you got to look beneath the surface to see that. On the surface, some people think that all major hardships are caused by sin, as a direct result of sin. Remember how the disciples did that? John 9, verse 2, they encounter a man who was born blind, and their question to Jesus was, Lord, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Those were the only two options they gave. The only two options they considered. This man's condition has to be, in their mind, the direct result of somebody's sin. We talked recently in our Wednesday night class, in our survey of the Bible, and we surveyed the book of Job, and that was the thought of Job's friends. Well, Job, you're suffering, and all suffering is caused by sin, so Job, you must be a terrible, rank sinner. Well, that may be what might appear to be sensible on the surface. A lot of people believe it. But reality is different. Sometimes we suffer because of sin, but not all the time. In the case in John 9, Jesus said neither. They offered him two choices. This man sinned or his parents sinned that caused his blindness. Which is it? Jesus said neither. Job wasn't what his friends claimed he was. Job suffered severely, but it wasn't a direct result. It wasn't God's specific punishment of Job for some terrible, egregious sin he had committed. So the surface tells us one thing. Reality, looking deeper, may tell us something different. Think about John's circumstances as the book of Revelation opens. He describes himself as being exiled to the island of Patmos for tribulation in the kingdom. John 1, verses 7 through 9. Here's John out on that old craggly island of Patmos, sent there simply because he was a Christian. Things didn't look real good on the surface for John, but then he receives this series of revelations from God that tell him a different story, that tell him actually God has things well under control and God wins in the end. Those that have sent you out to this place, they're not going to win. Different perspective when John was able to see deeper than what was on the surface. That's what we have to do. You want that eternal perspective. It's just like those magic eye posters. You've got to focus deeper into the image than just on the surface. Focus on the unseen. Well, what happens when I do that? What happens when I keep that eternal perspective? Again, back to our text, what does Paul tell us? In the first place, what happens when I keep an eternal perspective? I'll stay positive. I'll stay positive. Back to verse 16, therefore we do not lose heart. You see, a surface-only perspective can bring us down. Had Paul viewed his own life that way, he might have given up. If we're thinking of giving up, maybe we're only looking at the surface of our circumstances. Maybe we need to look a little deeper. When I keep an eternal perspective, my burdens become lighter and shorter. Back to our text, verse 17. For this light, momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. Sometimes God will remove burdens from our lives, but He doesn't always do that. Paul, remember, 2 Corinthians 12, verses 7 through 10, sought relief from God no less than 3 times. And each time, God said no. My grace, God said, is sufficient for you. And so sometimes the burdens won't be removed, but still, by comparison to the inner blessing and peace that God does offer us, that outer burden becomes lighter and shorter. That's why Paul could write in Romans 8:18, the sufferings of this present world are not worthy to be compared with the glory that shall be revealed in us. We sing about this sometimes. Often I'm hindered on my way, burdened so heavy I almost fall. Then I hear Jesus sweetly say, heaven will surely be worth it all. When I keep an eternal perspective, I become less enamored with the world. This world becomes less important to me when I keep an eternal perspective. Back to verse 18, chapter 4, as we look not to the things that are seen, but to things that are unseen. Things that are seen are transient. They're temporary. But the unseen things are eternal. And that leads Paul into what we know as the next chapter, but he's continuing the same thought in chapter 5 of 2 Corinthians when he says, for we know that if the tent that is our earthly home is destroyed, he's talking about the body, that which is wasting away, If it's destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For in this tent we groan, longing to put on our heavenly dwelling. If indeed by putting it on we may not be found naked. For while we're still in this tent, we groan, being burdened, not that we would be unclothed, but that we would be further clothed, so that what is mortal may be swallowed up by life. Paul's looking at the future, and he's saying those are the unseen things that we look forward to, that we keep our eyes focused on. We just focus on this tent in which we live, we're going to get discouraged if we fail to remember and keep our eyes on the unseen, because this that we see is just wearing out. If this is all we have, you could understand people being discouraged. But he said we keep our eyes focused on the unseen, and then when we do that, that which we see becomes less important to us. We're not as bothered by how this is wasting away, because we know something better is coming. We sing about that too. Earth holds no treasures, but perish with using, however precious they be. Yet there's a country to which I'm going, and heaven holds all to me. So I leave you with this question. Could your perspective use some improvement? Do you have a habit of only looking on the surface? Let me encourage you to look deeper, because looking deeper can change your life. Someone wrote, "Never regret growing old, because many are denied that privilege." And it is a privilege. What are we doing with it? Are we allowing the privilege of growing older to make us bitter? You know, and I don't mean this in any way, but hopefully a helpful one, but one to make us think. You know, sometimes you'll hear people talk about that bitter old man or that bitter old lady. You know, those terms were not created in a vacuum. Those terms were created because a lot of times people, as they get older, they just get more bitter. Is that what's happening to us? Or are we looking back on a lifetime of God's grace and God's good gifts with gratitude, thanksgiving? The longer you and I live, the more times we will have experienced God's help, God's faithfulness, God's goodness. And with each successive day, we're brought ever closer to being forever in the presence of our great God and Savior. And Paul says that it is in that hope that we were saved. Romans 8:24. In the hope that looks forward to that time. And not only that, Paul wrote that it's also in that hope that we presently live. We live in hope of eternal life, which God, who cannot lie, promised before times eternal. Titus 1 verse 2. Are you living in that hope? Keeping that eternal perspective. Is your life focused more on those things you can see or the things you can't? Your answer to that question will determine in large measure whether you grow old and bitter or whether you grow old and thankful. If you're not living with that hope is there for you to have, for you to enjoy, for it to be a part of your life. That's why Jesus came as one of us, died for us, and raised again for our justification, Romans 4:25. Do you recognize how much you need what He offers? If you do, and you want to take advantage of it, we would be honored to help you to do that. To study the Word of God with you, help you to see not only what has been done on your behalf through Jesus Christ, but also what He would have you to do in response to that. If you are interested in that, we invite you to let us know that today. And you can do that now if you like, as we stand together and sing.